made a comic book just about 3 months before the COVID attack, and I wanted to string together perhaps 10 stories that were related subtly. And it seemed that the 10 plagues in ancient Egypt was a great idea from the point of view of people who just would be living at that time and dealing with the problems of the day. So much to my good luck, the COVID came along a few months later, and the story had much more value and life to me and inspired me further. But then, nowadays, that the Israelis are killing Palestinians, it seemed that it even became more significant, the story that I had undertaken. So, 2 weeks ago, I started reading chapters from the story. The story is brilliantly illustrated, not by me, by a guy who was born in Trinidad and became homeless, living in a shelter, and we related perfectly. And it's maybe not of the best of taste to say that God inspired me like Moses with the burning bush or whatever. Uh, I was on fire with thoughts on the subject and couldn't wait to get them down. And it seemed that Isaac, who did the illustration, was equally inspired. And we were just simpatico. So 2 weeks ago, I read the first and second chapter, but I don't know if anybody was here then when we did it. So I will quickly start with the first chapter. And the first chapter is Korach, who is an anagram of Rocco. Some of you may know or not know. He's the super in the building next door. And Korak comes to me. I am alive in ancient Egypt with a store much like this where I make harps and other Egyptian instruments, drums. And Korak comes to me and says he's being abused by the overseers who want him to temper the habits of the people who are pushing so much garbage and waste into the Nile. So Cora comes to me and says, by the way, you know Moses, who is a fan of my shop, and Moses, who stutters, dreams that someday maybe he could play the harp and he could learn from Aaron, who is my half brother. And Aaron is a harp player who busks in the street, goes down by the fishermen and sings songs for them and writes poems. Korach comes to me, and I say, okay, I'll see what I can do. And Moses then arrives, and I say, Moses, your overseers are abusing the supers. And Moses says, I understand, you're right, I'll do what I can. But Moses also tells me that he just loves the people and being among the people. He loves the music, the food, and most of all, I suggest to him he misses his own mother. Being an important thought is that Moses' mother is truly a princess of Egypt, not my mother, but my mother during lean times and to preserve the supple breasts of his mother fed Moses as a baby as a wet nurse, and that's why he feels obligated. So, in his sense of obligation, he comes and he uh, does Korach a favor, and receives less abuse. The other supers see this and are resentful, and on dumping day, when they take all the shit that's accumulated, they throw it in the river on his spot where he is throwing his stuff, and the river clogs up, and there is this fungus growing of algae, and the river turns red like blood. And Korak comes to me, and he now complains that everybody blames him, and I say, wow, this is a holy shit moment. And that's the punchline at the end of the first story. But holy spelled Wholy. In the second story, Aaron goes down by the river to sing, and there is a couple of nice poems and songs that he sings, uh, poetry night stuff. But I'm not going to read it to you now because I did it already, and it will take a long time to tell. This is a 227-page story. But the fish are dying now from the algae growth. And the fishermen tell Aaron, who comes to sing with his friend Simeon, and Simeon is Nubian. He's very dark, and the fish are all dying, and Aaron doesn't know what to do, and he goes out, and should he eat the fish? Should he just throw it away? And he takes this dead fish and he throws it on the street, and the cops come and they see him littering and they abuse him to no extent, and he goes home and he decides he just is an outsider in a world where everybody is black. He is a white guy. And so he decides to paint his face, and he puts makeup on his eyes, and he makes beautiful designs on his forehead. And eventually he is just overcome with his ridiculous costume, and he rubs all the ink off his face, and he becomes blackface. And this is a reference to the first sound movie where Al Jolson gets up and sings the song Mammy to his mother, who he's trying to convince that as a jazz singer, there is value to his efforts. And he just stares at himself, blackface. So it's a reference to that. There's, again, beautiful drawings in that line. But we're going to start with chapter 3. In chapter 3, now we are in the royal palace. And Levi is a advisor to the Pharaoh, and he says, "Gather progeny of his most magnificent majesty, Lord of the never-before triumph over chaos and violence. Hail to his 5 names, Pharaoh, embodiment of Horus, wearer of the crown of Upper and Lower Nile, keeper of order, law, morality, balance, truth, and justice. Bow to his golden light, son of Ra, Tutmosis III." He is in the palace. There is all his children. This guy's got hundreds of wives and multiple forms of children. And the Pharaoh arrives and he sits in his golden throne and he says, "Levi, speak of today's affairs." And Levi says, "Well, your radiant divinity, if I am to sound so bold and be so bold, we have never experienced such bounty and splendor. Your people have received more gold, grain, and wealth than any time before." Now, the Pharaoh, he looks a lot like Donald Trump, unfortunately. And he says, suddenly his little secret midget advisor leans over and says, "Ask him about the blockage in the river, Your Highness." And the Pharaoh says, but before the Pharaoh can even speak, Levi says, "Your Holiness, have no fears. I have recruited our best engineers. The misunderstanding that led to this minor inconvenience has been corrected. In fact, this incident has taught us a valuable lesson. There are many lands eager to receive our wastes." Meantime, the whole court could care less, and all of his sons, the Pharaoh's sons, are talking among themselves, and the grandchildren are talking, and nobody's paying attention. Blah, 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 they say, and one is telling a story about a place he went. He says, "It's the most beautiful place I've ever been." And the children are saying, "Oh, look at this toy that Ahmed made for me." And the daughter said, "Can't I just go out and play with the other kids?" And finally, Levi says, "Your Majesty," and the Pharaoh, realizing there is just disorder and nobody cares about this guy, he says, "Silence, all of you, enough. This man descends from people who have served our family for over 400 years. He is a descendant of the great Brahmin from the East who has brought us knowledge of a world outside of our kingdom and our realm. Now we have come to face this new challenge of civilization. Again we must listen and learn. Hear him, but do not trust him. Have fear and trepidation as the white man begins his rise. Now you have to see Egypt as the center of civilization in the whole world. Societies are forming outside to the north. And the wall that protects Egypt is one little strip of land between the Red Sea and the Mediterranean. We've come to know what this place is. Right now it's in the news almost every day. And then Moses, sitting there next to his father, says, Father, I have come quite fond of these people. They brought new life to our kingdom. And their music. I hate to see us go back. Remember when they called grandfather Thug Moses? If we can care for them, if we can't care for them, can we let them go or find refuge somewhere else? The Pharaoh looks in disrespect of his son and says, Levi, explain my misguided son why they can't leave. Well, Levi says, you see, Your Royal Excellencies, our society is much like the Great Pyramid. Each serves the block above. Everyone is perfect in their place, and Pharaoh serves at the apex, reaching heaven and receiving the bounty of the gods, and returns the favor back to the foundations. The Pharaoh says, tomorrow an ambassador from Canaan arrives, and our wall has turned its fears to the north, and cracks appear. If we are to depend on them, our majesty must defer any misgivings. He is talking about the people from what is now Palestine, but at that time was Canaan. Our inheritance remains our power, and we will show it. Levi, see a great feast be prepared. All of you again, we show our greatness. Make America great, as they say. Your will be done, says Levi, and he rushes off. And he says as he's leaving, as he that wields the sword reaches the hand of destiny. And he comes to his assistant and he says, Hans, make a great celebration, a dinner for all his glory. Tomorrow we host the world. And Hans is laying in bed thinking about, I mustn't overlook any detail. This incessant disorder of the court must be curtailed. Everyone must know their place. Now we are days later, and the ambassador from Canaan is there. And there's a great feast going on. People are being served drinks and refreshments. And one of the servants comes and says, Ambassador, do refresh yourself. And he says, thank you. And then the servant goes over to speak to Levi, and she says, I thought I should tell you the Canaanite wanders unaccompanied and unattended. And he goes, oh, fine. And he goes over to the ambassador from Canaan, and he says, Ambassador, I'm sorry I couldn't get to you sooner. Pharaoh will dine with you now. A golden calf will be slaughtered in your honor. and a calf is paraded out with music and fanfare, and the calf is quite succulent for food. Uh, Levi says to the ambassador, says, Nickmod, who is the ambassador, you and your people sit in a high place and are very dear to the Pharaoh. We have prepared a great feast, not to impress you with the grandeur, but show you how deeply we appreciate your service. And they are brought into this special dining room and seated at the table. And he whispers to him, the ambassador. Levi says, speak only when addresses you. And immediately the Pharaoh looks and he says, Nickmod, you and your people find welcome in my house for one reason and one reason only. This has never changed or evolved from the day we conceived of your kingdom. A wall is a wall. It's funny how we talk about walls now. As our doorway to the north, we have sent to you every one of your needs. Yet we sense that you remain a bit resident to serve us as we ask. You have a tremendous amount of people trying to break through. Thieves, rapists, terrorists. Now exploit your porous borders. And Nickmod nervously reaches down for his food and he realizes, yikes, there's a frog in my soup. And he looks down at the frog and the frog looks up at him. And Moses immediately grabs the frog and goes, oops, I'm sorry. And the frogs are climbing up the pyramid in the last drawing. And at the very top of the pyramid now sits a frog saying, ribbit, ribbit, ribbit. And that is the end of the second chapter. Story of frogs. Next week, I hope you all will come. We'll read the chapter about frogs.